History's strange, it's alien, and it won't give us what we would like to have.
It is hour 3 of a Tuesday morning on this 18th of November, 2025. Almost took us time traveling back to yesterday. Renewal by Anderson makes the hour possible, and Dave Bowman is with us for the first time in 5 weeks after the hopefully successful shoulder surgery. Dave, you thought for a minute things went sideways with your shoulder and things may have to be redone. Has that been clarified yet?
Yeah, I guess. I panicked. There was a very loud popping and a lot of pain at one point, and it may have just been an adhesion letting go. I don't know. I don't know. We'll find out for sure on Thursday, and I'll be sure to let you know.
That's your first PT session?
No, first PT's not till, that's the 5 week plus, you can go ahead and take the sling off, which you'll notice I've already done here. So,
you've been a trooper all morning. I've seen you wincing and rubbing it and doing what you could. So thanks for making the effort and being here. We're back to Dave Does History, my friend. What are we looking at today?
Well, all right. So I've had a lot of time to think and write, well, not write, but talk to my computer because everything's been done via voice command for the last 5 weeks. So
you've let AI do the job. Okay.
No, I do it, but
I know.
Yeah. It's doing stuff with your left hand when you're not left-handed it's the great line from Inigo Montoya. I am not left-handed. But this has been an interesting year for me. This whole concept of this declaration, this Independence 250 thing has been eye-opening in a lot of ways. At the beginning of the year, for myself, and I haven't talked a lot about this, I decided that this was going to be my year of reading Homer. So I read the Iliad, I read the Odyssey, and as a part of that process, I began to realize late in the Odyssey how much there was here that applied to what was going on. And the realization that the founding fathers, the Franklins, the Washingtons, the Jeffersons especially, to them, this is not mythology. We teach it as mythology today. We teach it as, this is what these Greeks believed. To them, this was not mythology. To them, this was history. And it influenced their way of thinking. It influenced their way of doing things. And it's led to one of my favorite words, which is the word inculcate. The values that they were trying to pass on were embedded in these stories. And there's a third story that most people are less familiar with. It's a second Odyssey, if you will. It's called the Aeneid. And the Aeneid was written by Virgil, who was a Roman poet who essentially took a lot of the Greek influence and he began to put this thing together. Now, the Aeneid was very well known to the founding fathers. In fact, more well known than Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. They knew the Aeneid like the back of their hands. They had been basically taught, Latin through it. They had read it. They had discussed these ideas. And I think that that's something that we don't do today. Even if we know the story of the Aeneid, even if we're familiar with it, we don't really discuss it. We don't really talk about it. We don't really say to ourselves, what can I learn from this? When Americans think of our concepts of liberty, we have a certain idealism. We have a certain thought process we go through. Maybe you're watching Ken Burns's American Revolution documentary that's going on right now. We get this idea of resistance. We get this idea of defying the king, this idea of everything is about, being in opposition. But that's not necessarily what the men who wrote the Declaration of Independence and who voted for it felt like. To them,
and it doesn't necessarily mean freedom to do whatever the heck I think I want to do, and it doesn't matter.
Freedom to them, exactly, is not rebellion. It's obedience. It's obedience to a moral law that stands above kings and crowds alike. And where did they get this idea? Where did they develop this theory of how this works? Well, it started with a book written by Virgil in the 1st century BCE called the Aeneid.
And we pick it up in 60 seconds right here on Bill Mick Live. Headline today at BillMick.com is Dave Bowman's back, and there's a link there in that post to Dave Does History and Dave's other podcast as well. So catch up with those as you can. All right, Dave. So looking at the idea of liberty, not what people would think of today necessarily.
No, it's not. And that's part of our problem is that, we go back to the idea of critical thinking. How do we get to where we are politically? Well, we don't think about things the way that we should be thinking about them. This story in the Aeneid is a story, and I'm just going to give you the basic idea, assuming that most people have not read it or are not familiar with it. If you are, then this is a pretty simple overview. When the war at Troy ended, the Trojan War, we're all familiar with the idea of the Trojan horse. Those guys. Keep in mind, those things are not found in Homer's Iliad or his Odyssey. They are found in the Aeneid. And the story here is the story of the people who survived, the Trojans who survived the Trojan War, and of course they had to leave. Well, it's almost a second Odyssey as they journey westward across the Mediterranean in much the same way as Odysseus does. They have similar adventures. What they don't have, or what they have that's different from what Odysseus has, is they have a prophecy. They have a goal in mind. Odysseus just wants to go home. He just wants to get back to his wife and his child and live out his life the way he had planned to. Aeneas doesn't have that. What he has is a promise from a god that he is going to found a great nation. So he's going to take these few stragglers from Troy and he's going to form a great nation out of this. And this becomes his mission. It becomes his duty. It becomes his purpose in life. And the story of the Aeneid is all these, much like the Odyssey, all of these circumstances, all of these gods, all of these people who are attempting to distract him from his duty. And this will go so far as to include, by the way, his opportunity, maybe his only opportunity in life to have true love. He meets a woman along the way who happens to be the queen of a city. That city, by the way, is Carthage. And they are absolutely, by all indications, perfect for each other. They are madly in love. And it's described as perfect. And she says to him, why don't you just marry me and stay here in Carthage and rule as my king? And he has to make the decision. Well, is my duty to found my own country more important than my own desires to have this perfect relationship? And of course, not being a spoiler alert here, 2,000 years on, he chooses his duty. And this leads to other consequences that we don't have time to get into today. This idea of this duty, this mission that we are on, is integrated in the Declaration of Independence, and it almost comes directly, in many ways, from the Aeneid. When in the course of human events, Thomas Jefferson writes, that's not a rebellion. The course of human events is not a rebellion. It's the solemn acceptance of a divine, almost, duty. A nation that is going to obey the laws of nature and of nature's God. If we look at this from an Aeneid viewpoint, from an Aeneid moment of American history, we are leaving the wreckage of the king's monarchy, which you could insert Troy as, to found a lawful republic, which is what Aeneas is tasked with doing. He is tasked with going and founding a republic that will become a great nation. Jefferson's appeal to the divine providence it's almost a deliberate echo of the ideas found in classical moral destinies. And again, they knew this stuff. This was not, to them, it was not necessarily mythology. I don't really like the word mythology because we treat mythology as, pointless stories that we know better than to believe. We don't believe in gods and goddesses, and we don't believe in these. But it's so much more than that. In many ways, these are, if I could use the term, parables. there was no Samaritan who walked from Jericho from Jerusalem up to from Jericho up to Jerusalem. It was a parable. It was a story that was meant to inculcate a value into the people that he was talking to. In the same way, these stories were meant to inculcate those values into the people that would survive from Troy. And now Jefferson is drawing on these same ideas to teach our people these same values, which of course we already knew because we were very well versed in these things. Today we are not. You wonder where things go off the rail education-wise? And the bigger question is why? Maybe it's when we stop learning these great moral ideas, these great conversations that we used to have, that we don't have anymore. And so when we see things like the Declaration of Independence, we don't necessarily understand exactly what's being said.
And the big difference that you laid out in the phrase, duty versus desire. And we've reversed it of late anyway. Back with more. Dave Does History in moments. Stay with us.
It's a take on history you won't find anywhere else. Dave Does History on Bill Mick Live.
Renewal by Anderson bringing you this hour of the show. Our friends at the Salvation Army looking for your help. They need volunteer bell ringers. Easy enough for you and or your group to take part in. Go to register2ring.com. Register2ring.com. Get all the information there. You can help them out a lot and help the Salvation Army doing the most good. Dave, the kettle drive, something that was dear to your heart when you were working there.
Absolutely. It was probably my favorite part of the job was.
I remember you
kettles,
saying that. And they are so busy during this season. I tell you what, those Salvation Army bells, they are the sound of the season when you're out doing your shopping, whether it's for Thanksgiving meals or whatever. It gets the mood set, I think.
There is a common belief that the song Silver Bells was actually written about those. I don't know if that's true or not, but my parents insisted that it was. So,
you know what? It's a good memory. Hold on to it. I like that.
That's where you go. Speaking of memories, we were talking about Jefferson's Declaration of Independence and how classical literature influences us. And I guess what I'm trying to say to you is, when it comes to, we've been talking about critical thinking and education, these are things that are not given to us anymore. I went to school 50 years ago in the 60s and 70s, and I don't recall ever learning this stuff. In fact, in all that time, I took one Greek mythology course that was just a textbook of Greek myths with very simple questions on the test, like why did Perseus use a mirror to fight Medusa? There was no in-depth, there was no philosophical discussion about the lessons that were being taken from this. And I guess that's part of my frustration is that today we ask how these things come to be. How does Katie Wilson get elected in Seattle? How does Mandami get elected? How do these things keep happening? Well,
so the question becomes, where did we lose that in education?
And why did we lose that? That's a bigger question to me. Why did we lose these things? Because today, and this is something that I'm very frustrated by, try to have a conversation about the values of the Aeneid with your average person. They don't even know what you're talking about.
True.
There's no, how many of you have actually read or even heard of the Aeneid or know what the story is? And yet to Jefferson, this is where he's going to draw these ideas to as he begins to write the grievances. And we're not even halfway through the grievances yet. I think we're only up to number 5 or number 6, and we'll get back to those soon. The ideas here these are not just complaints. These aren't just accusations. These aren't whinings about, well, that king has done this to us. These are moral reasonings and proof that the colonies are acting within what we can call an Aenean framework of virtue and justice, a classical education. This is what we've been taught. We talked about the fact that, we kind of threw it back in the Whigs' face. This is what you believe, and now you're telling us that we can't believe that? Well, here we go. There are Every grievance in this document is a test. It's a measure of whether the king has broken the natural order that makes freedom possible. Now, of course, the king doesn't see it this way. He sees it completely differently, but he, too, may not necessarily have read the Aeneid.
That's why they set out to make the argument in this way, then.
Exactly. And to the average American of that era, to the average colonial American in 1775, these things made sense. Why? Because even if they didn't read Latin or Greek or speak those languages, these are the stories that they had grown up with. They knew these stories intimately. They knew these myths, and again, I hate that term, but they knew these things far more than we can even imagine. Jefferson writes, he has refused his assent to laws. That Aenean value, that virtue is, he's not obeying his laws. Tyranny begins when rulers deny lawful order. Aeneas, on the other hand, submits to divine law, even at the cost bill of the love of his life. He puts obedience to the law above all of that. And the colonies are demanding the same thing from their king. Now, transfer that to today. Do we as Americans have that value? Do we as Americans submit to the divine law, to this idea that service to the nation, sacrifice of our own desires is more important than that of the nations? Absolutely not, which is how you end up with Katie and Mundami.
So, well-reasoned list of grievances, not just to say we're whining, but here's why this is inconsistent, Your Highness.
Yeah, and again, these are values that have been, and again, it's one of my favorite words, inculcated into American thought, American idealism, and it really serves the foundational understanding that we have of liberty in 1775 and 1776. So when he writes these grievances, he's not just, throwing a bitch fit. These are legitimate things that are deep conversations about things that we couldn't even discuss today, which is what bothers me. We say he has obstructed the administration of justice. And this again comes from this Aeneid idea of justice and equity. Now we use the term equity today as almost a punchline in some ways. But in Aenean thought,
we abuse the term, right?
In so many ways. In Aenean thought, his city is going to be founded on justice. And without justice, freedom just becomes anarchy or despotism. Now think about that in terms of today. Without justice, without that, when we're just throwing out this term of, equity, everybody has to be equal. How has that affected our idea of anarchy in this country and this idea of despotism? You will believe this fool thing because that's equity. No, it's not. It's anarchy. It's not justice. He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly. In the Aenean idea, voice and duty have to coexist. Just because you're going to follow your duty doesn't mean you shouldn't have your voice in all of this thing. And Aeneas listens very carefully to his people, while a king like George, who chooses to silence them, becomes illegitimate. Self-defense, he keeps among us in times of peace standing army. Aeneas's republic is going to fear an army without law. That's where the founders get this idea. It's reinforced by the Pope later on. Liberty is armed with virtue, not occupation. All of these ideas, all of these concepts are being taught to us by these ancients. And the question is, why aren't we listening to them today? Because it would make things a whole lot better, regardless if you're left or right.
It's like we've turned our backs on our founding principles, and we're seeing the anarchy that's the result. Back with more Dave Does History in moments.
Thanks for making WMMB the Space Coast's #1 preset on the iHeartRadio app. The top of the app, right at your fingertips. Anytime.
15 presets on that iHeartRadio app. Why not make WMMB, Bill Mick Live podcast, Florida Roundtable podcast, Dave Does History, and What the Frock podcast? It can all be right at the top of the app for you. Renewal by Anderson bringing you this hour of the show. And it is our first hour of Dave Does History in some 5-6 weeks. So, Dave, we're seeing what the founders had learned so very well. And as you noted, I think we're seeing some places in our society where the results of complacency in education are befalling this society.
Yeah, and I think that's the issue here. And, of course, it becomes a question of why did this happen? These values, and again, I'm going to use the word, I hope it'll be the last time because it's an annoying word, I get it. The word is inculcate. These values have been repetitively driven into us in 1775 and 1776. These are not, pie in the sky ideas. These are things that we talk about on a regular basis.
They're known truths, basically.
They are absolutely known truths, and they're things that we do not discuss today because we do not critically think anymore. We don't have this background. We don't understand these things. The question to me is, why don't we? At what point did we stop teaching these ideas and these values? Because in reality, if we really want a truly equal liberty society, these are the values we should be pursuing. But instead, we are going in a different direction because we don't understand, as a society, and this includes me, by the way, we don't necessarily understand all these ideas. I was a third of the way through the Aeneid during this time off that it started to dawn on me that, wait a minute, there are things here that apply, and of course it was just a matter of looking at things better that I began to realize that, hey, this is involved here. And of course, Jefferson talks about those kinds of things. When we look to bring the classical moral order and the Declaration of Independence together, we see that these ideas aren't mythology as we define mythology today. They may not be true stories. They may just be parables, but they are, in fact, designed to teach us things that we should be talking about, that we should be discussing, that we should be inheriting. In the final paragraph of the Declaration of Independence, Jefferson writes those words, "We mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortune, and our sacred honor." This comes from a Greek ideal, pietas, which is the sacrifice of self for the community, the eternal over the immediate. Now, there's a lot of room we could go in this, Bill, but, people once asked me, one time asked me, why didn't you join the Libertarian Party? The reason I didn't join the Libertarian Party is found in two places, really. It's found in Scripture, where God literally says, anybody who says what's mine is mine and what's yours is just like the Sodomites. And this idea here of pietas, this idea that's ingrained from the Aeneid, that self is not as important necessarily as community. Now, that sounds strange to us as conservative because we believe in individualism, which is a huge part of this. But at some point, you have to put your individual identity, your individual desires behind what's best for the nation. Aeneas finds himself in a position time and time again where he has to choose between his duty to found this city, this republic on a hill, or do what would be best for himself. And time again in the book, he continues to choose his duty. It's not easy. And in fact, there's a great scene where he actually descends into the underworld to explain to his now dead girlfriend that he really loved why he had to choose his duty over her. And of course, she doesn't listen to him, and so forth and so on. These grievances that Jefferson writes that are based in these ideas, they don't lead to chaos. They lead instead to covenant. The Declaration's signers do not seek rebellion. They seek order. They seek a society that is self-perpetuating, that continues to grow and improve. And just like Aeneas, who goes through all these adventures, we don't have time to go through the whole book, but much like Odysseus, he finds himself battling the gods. At one point, Hera comes down and releases all 4 of the winds to try to keep him from going anywhere. He ends up in Carthage, where he falls in love with Dido. She's the girlfriend, and almost decides to stay in Carthage, but realizes, no, I can't do that. And the reason that the gods are trying to influence him there is because the city that he is prophesied to found is going to destroy Carthage one day. And so there's all this interplay where he has to decide whether he's going to do this. And of course, the city he ends up founding, by the way, Bill and listeners, is the city of Rome. So Troy, the destruction of Troy, leads to the founding of the Roman Republic in 503 BCE. And it's this idea that this Roman Republic, which influences the founders of this country and the framers of the Constitution to this great degree, that we today have completely lost. And why have we lost that? That's the question that I don't necessarily have the answer to. Was it intentional, or was it apathy? We stopped inculcating ourselves with those values.
I'm voting on complacency. I really, and some selfishness along the way.
Well, it certainly seems like that could be the start of it. But if our covenant leads to not to chaos, but to covenant to make our country better, we have to start looking at things. Have we as Americans kept that balance between liberty and virtue, between freedom and duty? Well, I'm free to do what I want. Up to a point, yeah. You were talking the other day about a great example of this as a military member. Yes, I have freedom of speech, but I willingly set that aside to serve in my country's military. My opinions are still my opinions, but it's not my place, it's not my duty, as Aeneas would have said, to express those. We quote the preamble today of the Declaration of Independence as a promise of rights, but we forget about restraint that Aeneas would have taught us. The obligation is to act under the laws of nature and of nature's God. In many ways, Aeneas's voyage is mirrored in the American voyage. We are, unfortunately, still at sea. We're still being tested. We're still being charged with carrying the flame of ordered liberty towards a city that is worth the name. That's why our Constitution doesn't say we've created a perfect union. It says we're trying to create a more perfect union. We are still not there. And the question has become, in many ways, we are like Aeneas. We are in Carthage right now, and we are being tempted to go other directions for our own desires, our own wants, our own beliefs, as opposed to the greater good, the greater promise, the greater destiny of liberty and of freedom. And the question is, which one will we choose? Well, it seems on the surface like it should be obvious. We should choose those things that are best for us as a nation. So why aren't we? And I think the answer is because we don't know these things, and because we don't know these things, we don't discuss these things. Can you imagine Mondami discussing Aenean values and liberty? I don't even imagine Katie Smith even knows that, even though she went to Oxford. I doubt she ever learned any of that. And I'm certain that she couldn't discuss it. And I'm certain that she would say that it's more important that we not do those things, because that's why she got elected.
More important, we not buy Starbucks. And we're back in a minute with Dave Bowman. And Dave does history on Bill Mick Live. Before we get to the phones for Dave Bowman, Dave, I got to tell you, thank you, because you gave me a gift today. Going back to the idea of sacrifice of self for the community and seeking the eternal over the immediate. My dad, whether he knew anything about Aeneas or not, preached those things to me the entirety of my upbringing. So I come away from today with a greater appreciation for my dad. My dad would say, Bill, freedom is the freedom to do what you ought to do. Not to do what you want to do, but to do what you ought to do. And he repeated it to me my whole life. So thank you for that.
This is exactly what we're saying, Bill. Whether he knew the Aeneid or not, your father had those values inculcated into him.
Yes, he did.
We do not have that today.
Dave Bowman, thank you so much, my friend. That was a great hour. It was a great 3 hours. It's good to have you back, pal.
It's good to be back.
All right, we'll see you next Tuesday.
Check out more stories from history at davedoeshistory.org.